In the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity through my work, been on every continent of the Earth with the exception of Antarctica. And while I have not been in every country, I've spoken with people from the tribes and the cultures and the traditions. And what I can say is that almost universally there is a sense that we've entered into a time very unique, unlike any other time that anyone remembers in the writings or in the history. And it's characterized a number of different ways. But more often than not, people say they feel like something began and it has yet to complete, or they're waiting for the other foot to fall, or the other shoe to drop, is the way they feel. And it's bigger than 9/11. It's bigger than the war in Iraq. Those may perhaps be symptoms of something, but they sense a low-level anxiety, a tension, if you will, that something big is about to happen, and that although we may not know it consciously, that we are in some ways preparing for whatever that is.
And how are you perceiving what that thing is at this time?
Well, from my perspective, I've spent the bulk of my adult life studying and researching ancient texts, traditions, cultures, the wisdom of those who have come before us. And they do, in fact, the texts, some of the calendars going back over 18,000 years, that's before the last ice age, all point to this time in history. And they say that we are living a very unique time. In the words that they left for us, they describe the time as a time of great change, and we've all heard about the prophecies that all converge in this moment in history. And that doesn't mean a lot to someone in the West, because we tend to discount those. Well, as a scientist, what I can tell you as a former Earth scientist is that we are seeing measurable parameters that are changing and appear to be converging. For example, the magnetic fields of the Earth are in rapid decline right now. They reached a peak about 2,000 years ago. They have declined consistently, never looked back since then. We are now at the lowest magnetic point in global magnetics that we've been the last 2,000 years.
What exactly does that mean for us as a species?
What it means, in the geologic record, we can see this has happened at least 14 times in the last 4.5 million years. It generally, in the past, has been a precursor to what scientists call a reversal or a flip in the magnetic fields of the Earth. Not the Earth physically, rather the energetic sense, the field itself. And it's got to be a really weird day, the day that this happens. People obviously have lived through it before. The Hopi have talked about it in their traditions. Biblical traditions talk about this in Egyptian traditions. What we know is that the magnetic fields in our bodies are very closely related, that a change in the magnetic fields of the Earth affect our dream states. And people are talking about having very, very intense, very vivid dreams, sleep patterns, time and space. People feel that time is speeding up. And there's a very good, excuse me, a very good, excuse me, there's a very good scientific reason why we perceive that speeding up of time. So there are very,
explain that?
There are very, very real measurable parameters that coincide with what the ancient texts and traditions say. So in addition to the magnetics dropping, there's a second parameter that the ancients called the heartbeat of the Earth. Scientists first measured this directly in 1899. It's a fundamental pulse of about 7.8 cycles or hertz per second. So it's just it's a constant pulse, and we believed that it was so constant it would never change. And we built communication systems, we built military weaponry based on this pulse, all up through the 1940s, 50s, 60s. So 1980s, 1990s, that pulse began to increase. And what we know is that our bodies, our cells, are tuned to this fundamental pulse of our Mother Earth, as the ancients said. And that our metabolism, our bodies, our rhythms, our cycles will try to match the pulse of the Earth. So as that pulse increases, to us, it seems as though time is speeding up, because we're trying to keep pace with that fundamental heartbeat. So we have these two parameters, this pulse that's increasing, the magnetics that are decreasing, and from the geologic record it appears that when those two parameters converge, that is a time the ancients called the Great Shift of the Ages, or the shift between the worlds. The native traditions to say we've lived in, we're in the fourth of 4 previous worlds, and when this world ends, we begin the 5th world. Mayan calendars go back over 18,000 years. They stop in the year 2012. They say beyond 2012, it will make no sense to track time the way you've tracked time in the past, because time will mean something very different to you. Egyptian calendars going back over 40,000 years say the Earth is going through a great change right now. So to answer your question, there are reasons in the cultural history that point to this period in time. Scientists now can measure parameters that are changing, and they know that's happening. The question is, what does it mean? So Western science is saying, we're seeing these things happen, we don't know what it means. The ancients are saying, this is what it means, and this is the opportunity for us to become better people. Because as we go through this change, it will push us to the very edge of who we believe we are. It will push the limits of our sensibilities. It will test us as a civilization and as a family like we've never been tested before. And we will learn that we need one another, and that is why they are pleading with us, the indigenous cultures, to remember our relationship to the earth, to care for the earth, to care for one another so that we can care for ourselves. If I understand the wisdom and the traditions correctly, it's the very act of living our lives in the presence of one another, of loving fully, intentionally, completely, of being present, being focused, being the best that we can be. By living life day in and day out, if we do that, by virtue of doing that, we have prepared in the only way that we really can for this time in history. And here's the reason why. You going to ask me the reason why?
Tell me the reason why.
Here's the reason why. It's because what scientists now tell us is that for every emotion, every feeling we have in our bodies, there's a chemistry that matches. So we literally have life-affirming or life-denying chemistries, hate chemistry or love chemistry. So that the anger, rage, and hate that we feel actually produces a chemistry that steals the life from our bodies. And as we all intuitively know, love, wisdom, compassion, understanding, tolerance, forgiveness imbues life into our bodies. So in the process of life, as we're going through these great tests, what we're actually doing is preparing ourselves in the only way that we would know how, by living life. And I think anyone you talk to anywhere in the world will say, man, something has happened. My relationships are harder than they've ever been before. Job careers, challenges within themselves and their health. Everyone, it's almost like all the fluffy, easy lessons are gone. And whatever we're going through right now, it's the big stuff, the core issues that really, although they may have been healed in the past, they're asking for a greater healing. And by virtue of that, they are preparing us, training us, if you will, so that we may better accommodate the changes in the world around us, although we may not know that on a conscious level.
So if you were speaking directly to a 20-something disenfranchised individual who's cruising the net and they stumble upon you, they're looking for something, they're not feeling part of anything, what can you say that really prompts them to think and care and do or be something that makes a difference in the larger scale, or even to themselves? What would you say to one of
Well, I don't know that anyone can be prompted to care, because that is an internal initiative. What I would say to them first, if you're feeling disenfranchised, if you're feeling disconnected and out of sorts, that is perfectly normal and what I would expect for this time in history. People feel like their worlds have been turned upside down. What science now is telling us, and this ties into some of the work that we've talked about earlier, Western science between 1993 and the year 2000, under laboratory conditions, established the fact, and it is now a fact, that we are all connected through a field of energy. We're bathed in the field of energy. That is the mirror. Literally, it provides the mirror of the world around us for what we have become from within. So if we find ourselves in a society that appears hateful, or families that are non-supportive and judgmental, that world around us is nothing more, nothing less than what we as individuals and collectively have become. If we want to change this world, we must become, and this is the key, the ancient wisdom, we must become the very things that we choose to experience in life. If we choose love and compassion, nurturing, we've got to become those things. And I've had people say to me, how can I become those if I don't experience it? And that's the great workshop of life. You must choose to become and demonstrate and live in the world the very things that you'd like to experience yourself. And in that way, from within, you open the door to the laws of the physics of this world that we're only beginning to understand, to give that back to you. So that, I think, is perhaps one of the greatest challenges. But those young individuals, I mean, everyone's feeling it. There is a generation that is feeling displaced or disenfranchised, because the world that they're seeing makes little sense to them, and the answers they're receiving aren't the answers that meet their needs. So in their questioning, they're going after, in their own way, seeking their own answers. I made reference to this in the talk earlier today. A 12-year-old boy that came up to me in the midst of a program during one of the breaks, and he handed me a piece of paper, and we just spoken about the breakdown of the peace process in the Middle East, and the buildup of arms and weapons, and the fact that one half of the world's nations are at war right now. In this piece of paper, he printed it. He says, if you can't create the peace, if you can't find the peace in your time, he said, stop the war long enough to give us a chance. He didn't say stop the wars, he said the war. Their sense is, and so many young people feel that it's over anyway. There's a sense of hopelessness, that we might as well live our lives and do whatever we want to do now recklessly because it's all over. And I hear that from people, and I can understand why they would feel that, because this is such a unique time in our history on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's the time where our world and the people of the world need us the most, because it's the time where we must remember the things that are important and come together as a family, care for one another, even people who are difficult to care for, and remember that there's a single field out there of consciousness. There is no them and us, there is a we, and we're part of everything. We're part of every government that's ever been in power. We're part of every atrocity that's ever happened, and we're part of all the beautiful life and the inventions and all the good things. It's all part of that same field by virtue of this understanding.
Would you say as a species it was necessary for us to become so disenfranchised and in dis-ease to get to a point where we even understood the need for this paradigm shift, as it were?
Well, your question is, as a species, is there a need for us to be at this point? I believe that there is no need, and I think it's a fascinating choice. I've spent a lot of time with indigenous peoples from throughout the earth, and although they use different language, they all say something very similar. They say that there was a time when we lived our lives very differently in this world, remembered who we were, and we lived much closer to the earth, not in a primitive state necessarily. We just honored life and one another, and something happened, and they're not clear on what it was that happened, and we began to forget. And in our forgetting, we so long for the connection to the divine, to the feminine, to the masculine, to the earth, to one another, to something greater. We so long to have that once again. So we embarked on a path of external technology in an attempt to remind ourselves of who we are from within. And as an engineer, and I've worked in engineering a good portion of my adult life, some amazing technology, from Star Wars to defense to projects that are so far beyond where we think technology is today. And as advanced as all those things are, I can say I've never seen a piece of technology that humans have built that does not mimic something that we already are from within. What we know, Western science will tell us that every cell in our body has about 1.17 volts of electrical potential. So you take 50 trillion cells times 1.17 volts, and there's a lot of potential, a lot of juice there. Every cell is a capacitor. It transmits, it receives, stores information, all the things our technology do. And what my indigenous friends and what the ancients say to us is we will continue to build a very complex world of greater and greater complexity out there in the world around us, until we remember that we are those things, and then we no longer need those because we become the very things that we've built, and then that way we find our way back. So it's interesting that it asks the question, when we see civilizations of our past that we think are primitive because they don't have a VCR or a toaster, for example, were they really primitive, or were they so advanced that they didn't have the need for the kinds of things that we have today? And it's a question that's being taken seriously by a lot of archaeologists, anthropologists today. So as we find our way, it's an interesting path, because what has happened is when we were lost, some of us chose this path of external technology, and now we've pushed it about as far as we can. And to survive, now we've got to come back and bring in the other portion, the internal technology, the wisdom of our relationship, the power of human emotion, and the role that it plays in the physics of our world. It is perhaps, as the ancients said, the single most powerful force in the universe. Human emotion focused as very specific modalities of prayer, Western physicists are only beginning to understand this. They thought we were observers, and now they're saying we're not observers. We, by the act of being here, we are participating, we're creating the world that we're seeing right now. There's a school of physics now that suggests that the universe, in fact, is here and exists because we're looking. And what they found is that every place human consciousness seeks or peers to see and investigate what's there, the act of looking is an internal process, and consciousness will place something there for us to see. They said we'll never find the end of the universe. We'll never find it because every place we look, consciousness is the creator, will put something there. And it is these kinds of understandings that are bringing science and physics back full circle to tie in this outer and this inner technology, saying, you know, maybe we have something to say and something to do about the peace in our world and the healing in our bodies. Maybe it's not just a random process. And that's where the power of our inner technology begins.
You wrote a book called The Isaiah Effect, speaking about the collective consciousness when focused properly through the emotions, the amount that can be accomplished with really a relatively small number of people. Can you just encapsulate that very briefly for people?
The investigations, well, first of all, these are not new ideas. The idea that we are connected through a field of energy has been around forever, thousands of years. What's new is the scientific validation of the field. And scientists now coming to terms, okay, the field's there, what do we do with it? How connected are we really to this field? It led to a series of experiments back in the 1970s, and the TM people, Transcendental Meditation University, backed and funded and pulled in some very good scientists to do some of these fields. What they found was they had 24 cities in the United States with populations over 10,000 people. And they did experiments, scientifically governed experiments, and they would take a certain number of people and ask them to feel the feeling of peace, for example. Not to think the thought, but rather to feel the feeling in their bodies for certain periods of time. And what they found was during those periods of time, statistically, the communities around them changed. Crimes against people declined, violent crimes. Emergency hospital room visits declined, traffic accidents declined. In cities where the stock market soared when this was happening. And when the people stopped feeling the peace, all those statistics reversed. And this led to a greater experiment. It was called the International Peace Project in the Middle East. It was during the Lebanese War with Israel in the early 1980s. They had people that were strategically placed in the war zones. And during the window of time, it's called the prayer window, when the people were feeling the peace in their bodies, terrorist activities dropped to zero. They completely stopped. And all the other things happened. The crimes against people, violent crimes, emergency hospital room visits, all declined. And they tried these just to make sure it wasn't maybe the time of the month or full moon cycles or holidays. They tried them all different times, double-blind studies, statistically valid studies. And what they found was it takes a relatively few number of people to jumpstart this experience in consciousness, and the number is the square root of 1%, which is a very small number. So if you take a population, whether it's 10 people or a million, and you take 1% of that in your calculator, and then you take the square root of that, it'll tell you how many people that you need. So in a city of 1 million people, for example, it only takes about 100. Or in a world of 6 billion people, it only takes about 8,000 to jumpstart this effect. Obviously, the more people that participate, the more accelerated the effect. As empowering as the discovery of a message within the cells of all life is, what may be even more significant is that the only way we could ever unravel the mystery and decode a language in the DNA of life, we haven't talked even about what this language is yet, the only way we could do that is to cross the artificial boundaries, the traditional boundaries that have kept us separate from our world now for over 400 years. Science is only about 400 years old. And when science came along, and I'm a scientist and I support the scientific method, and the best scientists will tell you that our science is incomplete. What science came along, it did, was it came along and compartmentalized and separated what is actually all unified together. There is no physics and chemistry and biology and geology out there. There's a world, we call it nature. To help us feel comfortable with the complexity of nature, they compartmentalize it into sciences now to such a degree that when a physicist studies physics, we no longer know that that physics has any relation to perhaps chemistry. Or when I was working on this project, the linguist told me no one ever said that language had anything to do with life, or that biology had anything to do with ancient texts. And it was only by crossing those traditional boundaries, honoring the wisdom of our past, that we were able to come to the understandings that we did. And what that understanding is, it's a research project that I began as an engineer back in the late 1980s during the last years of the Cold War, looking for a single principle of peace that would include every human on the face of the earth, regardless of their beliefs or their lifestyle or their heritage or their culture, something that was common to everyone and that made sense in the 1980s. This was before the Genome Project or any of these things happened, to look at DNA in the cells of our bodies. And following the clues that were left in the ancient texts, all I did was follow them step by step, and the clues said that within your body is a language, and here's the way that language works. And what we now know is that the DNA in our bodies, the elements that we call DNA, literally are linked to the letters of ancient alphabets in very precise ways. And when we make those translations, when the chemicals become the letters, lo and behold, the letters start to spell words, and the words start to spell sentences, and the sentences have meaning. And it appears that the message in our cells exists as many, many layers. And what we've done is crack the code for only the very first layer. It took 12 years to do it. It's a very brief message, and it literally translates, literally says to us, when we look at the DNA, the uppermost level of the DNA, the 4 DNA bases, the building blocks of all life, it literally says the words God, eternal, within the body. And the complexity of life, from a single yeast cell to the complexity of a human and everything in between, appears to be different combinations of these elements. So a scientist will say they're different combinations of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, and they're correct by virtue of our language today. The ancients didn't know about those words. They looked at it differently, and they said they're different combinations of the words God, eternal, within the body, and they're correct as well. 2 different ways of describing our world, very, very different periods of time.
So for this one top layer discovery, what is the implication at this point in history?
The implication for me, searching for a principle of peace, there are many implications. And I've had people ask me, well, why don't you take on the evolutionary biologists, or why don't you take on the theologians? And we could with this kind of information, but that wasn't the purpose for me. I'll let other people take those things to task. My purpose was to find the single principle of peace. What this message says to us, 3 things. It says, beyond a shadow of a doubt, we're here on purpose. It's an intentional code. We don't know who put it there. God, eternal, within the body. We don't know who God is or what God is. It's interesting, however, that the word God in our bodies matches the word that we find in 2,200-year-old texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the same name. It tells us we're here on purpose. It tells us that we're part of one another in all life that shares that message. So any form of life where the code can be translated, God, eternal, within the body, it says they're part of us and we're part of them. And because this code exists even in ancient forms of life where we've been able to glean DNA, in single-celled organisms, for example, it says whoever put that code there existed before those primitive organisms. So it suggests that we are part of perhaps something much greater than we've ever imagined. Now, you can read a lot into that. Scientifically, we can't say what that something is. All we can say is there's a code there. It's intentional. It links all life. For me, what it says to us, as I travel the world and I meet these people, and people are ready for peace, they need a reason to look at one another differently. In so many parts of the world, the hatred is so strong because of what has happened between peoples. They need a reason to see themselves differently. And if we were ever going to find a reason, I think the name of God, the same name within the cells of all humans, it gives us a place to begin. It gives us a common plateau, a denominator that says at this very level what we can say is we're not so different. It says that. It says that for us at the very least. Someone asked me, I was doing an interview, a radio interview a few weeks ago, and they said, well, do you think this is going to change the world? And I said, realistically, it's not going to change the world. It's a place to begin. It gives us a reason. And I think it's something, I've got to tell you as a scientist, the idea of looking at DNA as a language is a bizarre concept, a language that we can actually read as alphabets. It's been called the language of life since the 1950s as a metaphor, without perhaps knowing how close that metaphor really is to what has happened.
Did I understand or misunderstand you when you were saying that that is not true just in the ancient Hebrew, but also in other ancient languages?
Well, it is true in other languages. In the year 2000, there was a census that was done on the Earth. It's believed to be the most accurate census ever done. And it told us some very interesting things. First of all, it said about 6.2 billion of us on this planet right now. That number's so big I don't even know what it looks like. But it said of that 6.2 billion people, over 95% of the people of the Earth believe in the existence of a higher power. And of that 95%, over one-half call that power God. So if we were ever going to find a single principle of peace that touches the most people in the deepest way, if we can find a principle that is tied to the already existing spiritual traditions, I think that's a good place to begin. So what we know now, half of the 95% believe and actually call the power God. The ancient Hebrew language is the language that holds the oldest records for the spiritual traditions of over half of the world's population. 1 billion Islamic and 2 billion Judeo-Christian, 3 billion people are linked to the Old Testament, the book of Genesis and the Torah, and what subsequently became the Quran, all linked through the prophet Abraham. The oldest records of Abraham are in the Hebrew language. So it made sense to me to use Hebrew first, to translate life in our bodies into an ancient language. It's called a root or a mother or a core language. Once it was done, and Hebrew, biblical Hebrew, lends itself to this kind of work. Once it was done in that language, I then began to look at other languages. We know for certain it works in ancient Arabic as well. It looks like it works in Sanskrit, although it's not. That work is not complete, so I cannot say definitively. But if it does, what that means is, in addition to the Hebrew, it's the basis for over half of the world's population. If it's in Sanskrit, it's the basis for for Hindu and for many of the Buddhist traditions. We've reached a lot of people in a language that makes sense to them with a very empowering message. I'm an optimist, and as I've had the opportunity to travel the earth and meet with people, I have a great faith in our species, in our destiny. I think it's a tribute to our species that we have each carried a message from the first day of our existence perfectly replicated in every cell of our bodies. And it gives us a reason to become better people and to create a better world. I love this world, and I love the people of this world. And I appreciate you and your vision and your dedication for helping us to take this message to a broader audience. So thank you very much.
To learn more about this subject, you might want to pick up a copy of the God Code. Meanwhile, another sage we find to be equally inspirational is eco-philosopher extraordinaire Peter Russell. Until next time, thanks for watching.